Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senator Creighton, I'm going to try not to be repetitive, but I'm going to pick up where Senator Soliger left off. More specifically, I'm going to ask you to look at your bill on page 3, lines 18 through 20. I'm sorry, make it lines 16 to 17. And it deals with let me know when you get there.
Yes, okay. I'm there. Thank you.
The issue concerning that you cannot remove a monument, and you define monument, a lot of portraits, memorials, or other designations. And when you say other designations, and we're going to talk about that, including a statue, portrait, plaque, seal, symbol, building name, bridge name, area name, street, that honors an event or person of historic significance. And we've kind of danced around this issue of how do you determine historic significance? What's the methodology?
The person of a historical significance would, under the terms of the bill where that provision would kick in, would have been 25 years or older. So that local entity or those community leaders at that time that so determined that person was of historical significance and named a park, a bridge, a street after that individual, that would be under their criteria, not mine.
So then you're saying that determining historical significance would be the job and responsibility of the city of Dallas, as an example, right?
It would have been at that time, correct.
All right, so then if for some reason the city of Dallas is now looking at repositioning, not tearing down history or erasing history, but repositioning a statute, as they have done, they would have to, under your bill, make a determination first that it met the definition of historically significant, right?
Well, first, I think they would, under my bill, they'd have to determine whether or not it was older than 25 years.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And you're right about that. Yeah.
And then after that, you're correct. It would be certainly determining whether or not it was a historical figure or name in question.
No, that's not what I said. A person of historic significance. If the city decides that's not a person of historic significance, then this definition wouldn't apply. Is that correct?
I'm not so sure. I mean, it's not saying whether or not history depicts them as significant. It's just saying, I think, whether or not a reasonable person would agree that at the time of the naming of that individual park, street, or area, structure, whatever it may be, that that person played a role in history, which is pretty broad definition.
Where does it say at the time in your bill?
Well, the distinction between 25 years or older. So it would obviously not have been a legislative decision on if that park was named after a historically significant person. It would have been local community leaders. As Senator Miles and I in our exchange talked about Representative Coleman's father and how back at that time there were leaders that probably led an effort to name.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying where in your bill does it say that? You make a distinction between 25 years and older, but are you saying that just because that distinction makes the determination of historical significance, or does it make a distinction in terms of removal?
It would be subjective to the criteria they used back then to determine, but I'm sure it's whether or not a reasonable person would think that person played a role in history, and then otherwise it's local leaders that would lead the effort to name a structure or a street or park after that person.
So you're saying that's prima facie, that if you had a statute of over 25 years old, then it's prima facie that that person was of historical, quote-unquote, significance.
Yes, I understand why you're focused on the word significance and what that means. I understand from a legal perspective, how that could be manipulated or argued or played.
I don't know whether it can be. I'm not talking about manipulation. I'm talking about a reading of the statute. If someone has to now, if this becomes law, which I hope it doesn't, I'm going to try to make sure that it doesn't. But if it does, then someone reads this and they would say, well, okay, the person was not of historical significance. And their interpretation would be based on what they thought about the particular person. You understand what I'm saying? So there would be an interpretation that would have to take place by a municipality or a county in this instance.
I believe it'd be pretty hard to argue around the fact significance, whether that's positive significance or negative, that if they played a role in history, which is a pretty broad term or definition, it would be hard to exclude.
Okay, and I want to go down that road in a few minutes. In terms of in the same area, you talk about other designation. Isn't that pretty vague? When you define monument and memorials, you say or other designation. What does that mean?
Marker.
But don't you think you should be more specific in terms of other designation, because that's kind of vague? Don't you agree? Well,
there's a survey marker that's of stone that is located in Montgomery County that just signifies the date and the location in which Montgomery County was established as the third county created in the state of Texas, and that would be a marker.
All that's fine. I understand that.
That would be a marker other than monument or...
Okay, but again, though, there's no specificity in terms of what other designation. Let me tell you why that's important.
Sure.
The reason it's important is because you waive sovereign immunity under this particular bill. And so by waiving sovereign immunity, the state or a governmental entity that decides to do something under this particular bill could in fact be held liable. You give the Attorney General the ability to file a lawsuit, ask for declaratory judgment or an injunctive relief, and then you provide for a pretty hefty penalty each and every day. So given that, don't you think that there should be specificity in terms of what the definition of monument or memorial is?
I think it's a valid point. I certainly respect the point, Senator West. I think ultimately the bill allows for a process for a judge to make that determination. And
have to go to court. I thought we didn't like a bunch of lawsuits in this body.
Access to court is very important. Access to grievances and to the courts is always a high priority. And so no one likes lawsuits, but when you need a lawyer, thank God for them, right?
Well, again, I think that's when you have that particular vague language in there, I think you're inviting a lawsuit in this particular area.
Appreciate the point.
Let's talk about, are you familiar, sir, and I need to follow up now with my colleague, Senator Miles. There are two African Americans in this body, okay? And you know the history of Texas and other Confederate states. But I want to make certain that we don't leave this floor without recognizing what that history is and the importance of that history as we deal with this particular issue. Let's talk about it for a second. Now, you would agree with me that, quote unquote, under your definition, monuments and memorials over 25 years, that's where you find most of your Confederate monuments and memorials. Is that correct? Over 25 years old?
Absolutely, yes. The Confederate monuments, the Alamo monuments, the Ten Commandment monuments.
I'm talking about the Confederate. I'm not talking about all the. I understand what you're saying. I'm talking about the Confederate monuments. We don't have any that's less than 25 years old.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And in your opening statements, you said that you were witnessing what was going on around the country, and more specifically in the state of Texas, and that there was a lot of quote-unquote movements in order to reposition monuments, specifically Confederate monuments. Are you aware, and Senator Miles pointed this out, George Bush was governor of the state of Texas at the time, that we removed from the Supreme Court a Confederate monument. Were you aware of that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And just this year, the Children of Confederacy creed was removed from, frankly, a wall just down from my Senate office. Did you know that?
Yes, Senator Miles and I had that exchange as well. Yes.
And then 2 years ago, the University of Texas removed the Robert E. Lee. Is he a significant historical figure? Significant?
It was significant enough for the University of Texas to place that monument originally, yes, of course.
Okay, so it's subjectively, the University of Texas at Austin believed, just because they believed he was significant, that made it basically significant to everyone else?
Yes, this isn't about a process 25 years ago or 80 years ago or what have you. This is about a process for removal going forward.
I understand what it's about.
So
I do. It's probably one of the most divisive issues that we're going to have in this body.
Subjective, and
but that's fine.
This legislation is not only about removal of Confederate monuments. There's other monuments that have been removed that weren't Confederate.
Okay, that's great. I'm just talking about the Confederate monuments right now.
Correct.
If you don't mind. So let's kind of focus on that.
So yes, I'm aware of this, the Supreme Court building changes, yes.
So then, because the University of Texas has depicted him as historically significant, then everyone else in the state of Texas should do the same thing, whether you be a university, whether you be a city. Is that correct?
That's correct. And under my bill, there's also a process for balancing history if you feel like, or the university felt like, an additional monument would balance out that significance.
So then,
and contrast it, then this bill provides for a funding process to provide that balance.
In all due respect, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm just trying to, because the time is tight, we agreed upon a certain amount of time, so I'm just trying to get my questions answered. So if the city of Dallas decides that Robert E. Lee is not historically significant, then they would, in fact, or Austin, or whatever city, they would in fact be in violation of your bill if it becomes law. Is that correct?
No, because the city of Dallas would be afforded a public vote on exactly that.
Well,
with that public vote, the right of the people to speak would be within the spirit of the intention of the bill itself, and that's powerful, right?
That's a great question, great answer. So if the city council of Dallas, under current law, decides whatever process they decide to use, citizen input, I know we had plenty of citizen input in Dallas on this. If the city council makes the decision under current law, then they'd be in violation of your bill, correct? If they decide that Robert E. Lee is not a quote-unquote significantly historic figure, then they'd be in violation of your bill, would they not?
If the bill passed, correct. Yeah, the public would be allowed to vote, and if the public rejected...
I understand that. I'm just saying under current law.
If the public rejected the city council's initiative, then the second choice would be to erect a General Grant or a Lincoln.
Sure, I understand all that. They can do all that.
And the bill provides a path for that process.
My other question to you is this. Let's talk about, now, was Lee a traitor? Was he declared a traitor? Historically, was he declared a traitor?
That's all subjective review of history, Senator West.
No. I mean, is there...
I've got to get more than 8 words out. I promise I don't have more than 15.
All right, I'll give you 10.
All right. So I'll keep it to 15 words, but I got to get past 8.
Go to 20.
Okay. My opinion, which is truly subjective as well. I mean, anybody's opinion would be, would be important to me on this floor. But at the time, there were opinions that he was and was not a traitor. Today, he would be considered one. But at the time, people thought differently on, standing up for your state and then country second. Some people thought stand for your country and state second. And because Lee chose Virginia first, history will depict him as they will. And you and I both know that if a Robert E. Lee did that today, the word you use, traitor, would be the label he would receive. But you and I both know, as well as history played out under Republican and Democrat presidents, McKinley and Eisenhower, and those that gave a widow's pension to Confederate war veterans and gave a veteran cemetery, a national veteran cemetery burial to those same. That those, to me, indicate in reviewing history that those that followed him 100 years later in both parties didn't feel like he was a traitor.
All right, so now, do you believe, sir, the reality is that the United States of America back then declared him and other veterans of the Confederacy traitors? Okay? It was subsequently changed. It was subsequently changed in order to bring the country back together. Hold on a second. And then also he was stripped of his citizenship. Were you aware of that?
That's why I mentioned President McKinley, because as Confederate veterans fought in the Spanish-American War, that reconciliation effort began to happen.
I was just asking you whether you were aware of that.
Members, we want one at a time. All right. Thank you.
I am aware that when General Lee surrendered, General Grant, his first comment was, "Those rebels are now again our countrymen." And I know that the people at the time began the process of healing as fast as they could, and others, it was a lot slower, long road, and like I mentioned, we all have our different depictions of history, but the word you use, traitor, I can't speak to that other than people thought differently then. If that happened today, he would be considered.
Okay, but again, it's not my word, it's history's word, okay?
As it is for George Washington, and as it is for William Henry Travis,
it was not my word, it's history's word.
That's right.
Okay? And yes, in order to bring the country back together again, it's my belief that a decision was made by the U.S. government not to declare them traitors, but to bring them back into the fold. Okay? Even if, and Senator, we've got to go down this road. This book right here contains the original I've got to be real careful with it. Yeah, please. This is the original journal from the state of Texas when it wanted to succeed. 1861 is when this was printed. Okay? And again, I want to focus, members, on the fact, be careful with that because that's an original, all right, that after the war, we attempted to bring the country back together. And some of the words in terms of the convention to succeed, when Texas in 1845 decided to join the rest of the Confederate States, here's some of the words in that on page 64 if you need to look at it. We hold as undeniable truths that governments of various states and of the Confederacy itself was established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity. That the African race had no agency in their establishment. That they were rightfully held and regarded as inferior and dependent race. And in that condition only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial, check this out, or tolerable. That in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights, that the servitude of the African race as existing in these states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free, and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experiences of mankind. And listen to this part. And the revealed will of the Almighty Creator, as recognized by Christian nations, by the destruction of the existing relationship between the two races as advocated by our sectional enemies, would bring inevitable calamities upon both and the desolation upon the 15 slave-holding states. And that's just a part of it. Senator Creighton, the journal is replete with these types of references. The state back then used Almighty God. Almighty God. as a reason in order to succeed and to maintain slavery of happily African Americans. And so when you begin to think about this particular, I can go on and on, there's several other pieces, but I know others want to speak to this issue. I would think, sir, that what we should be doing is trying to bring people together like we did yesterday. But what you're doing now is basically saying that you want to substitute our judgment here at the legislature for local communities. Think about this. The cities that you're complaining of right now are basically urban cities. You know what the common denominator is? The common denominator is those city councils, commissioners' courts, etc., are more diverse now. They're more diverse. And so people of different backgrounds are now having input into the decision-making process that they had heretofore didn't have. Something else I want to point to you. Most of these monuments, 25 years ago, were authorized by Democrats. And Republicans were on the side of free men, African Americans. So it's not a party issue. Democrats did this a long time ago. But what I say to you today is that these various bodies that have more diversity should be in a position to be able to make those decisions. If they make the wrong decision, then just as they got elected, they can be rejected.
And under Republican governance, we took the plaque down, and under Republican governance, we erected the Latino monument and the African American monument. So we are working together in a way as we step forward on this walk and this journey. We own the history that you brought to me just now. I'm just simply saying we need to own it outright, and then we need to continue to walk and continue on that journey and continue to learn from it so that everybody can be educated correctly, and so we never make mistakes with our opinions or our judgment, or it's recalibrated in a way that would only come from hiding it, erasing it, or removing it.
Let me also go back to the Civil War. Do you realize, sir, that we had more Americans, be they Confederate or otherwise, killed during the Civil War than almost all of the deaths that we've had from our brilliant, brave men and women in the military in history? And the reason I bring that point out to you is because I want you to recognize how much passion, that's a bad word, I shouldn't say it that way, but how divisive this issue was and how brothers fought against one another to maintain slave rights, state rights over people of color. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, look at history. Some people say, this is about state rights. Yes, it was about states' rights. Sent it back to court in order to make certain that they could maintain a slave industry, okay? And some of the people around here on these walls had slaves. I'm not going to point with specificity to them, but I think all of us know. And some of them were brutal towards slaves. But yet and still today, what we do on this floor, knowing the history of, frankly, the rationale about this particular bill, we said that we need to pass a bill that won't allow, I said it in the negative, cities to determine the historical significance of these people. And I'm just trying to figure out, knowing that background, why would you want to do that?
Well, I understand those beliefs that you mentioned, and those are not our beliefs now. And as those secession documents that you brought to me, as painful as those are to read, we also know that Sam Houston stood against that effort. He stood against
Right, he did.
what was found in that document, and he lost his support of the public and lost his election afterwards because he stood for it. And this
Right.
bill provides a process for protecting Sam Houston monuments.
Well, at all due respect, who is it protecting it from?
Oh, it's definitely been proposed and considered in and around the Houston area, Senator West, to remove Sam Houston monuments.
Okay.
Right or wrong,
I'm sorry.
right or wrong, that those considerations and those proposals have been brought forward. So that's why a process that would allow you and I to work together in a way that would consider this subject going forward is a good process. This conversation is a healthy process.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I think we should have this conversation.
And I think that we're all better for it. So I understand what you mean by local control, and the point you made is, why do I feel like that we should impose restrictions on cities? And we've talked about that a lot this session.
We sure have.
There's many more things that we do not impose on cities as political subdivisions of the state than we do. But what we're talking about here is allowing the public with older monuments, the public that lives in those cities, to have a voice, and not just the councilman of the day or a two-term member that has an idea that might be palatable politically for that time, but the public would have a say in that vote, as the public would be able to come into this building if we have a Capitol complex change considered and testify in our hearings.
Okay. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Did the public have input into drafting this particular bill?
Well, we drafted this legislation during the special session of last session. I didn't get a hearing. When the bill was refiled this session, the public's input was allowed during the hearings process.
Did you reach out to any of the cities that have experienced issues with whether to take down or leave up statutes to get input?
We visited with representatives of the delegations from those cities, yes.
You visited with me about this?
No, representatives from the local cities themselves that were sent to lobby on behalf of the cities. People that were hired to represent the city's viewpoint.
But you never did have any hearings or anything like that? I mean, given the explosive nature, Senator Creighton, of this particular bill, and you knew that there was going to be a lot of compassion concerning this bill, or passion concerning this bill, excuse me, would it not have been more feasible to, given the fact that it wasn't recognized during the special session, to spend some time in some of the urban centers to understand exactly what they thought would be the best solution for this bill? So it would truly be in fact, a joint effort between Democrats and Republicans.
Well, and I appreciate the suggestion and the idea behind it. I mean, the hearings process itself, the meetings we had in our offices, and let me tell you, we had a very robust and thorough hearing, in my opinion, in Senator Birdwell's committee. And all members were welcome to join. All members were welcome to testify. All members were welcome to sit in on the dais. And but with that being the case, and everyone's busy and everyone has different agendas and time frames and committees and places they have to be, I think the vetting process for the legislation by members that are from big metropolitan areas, I think they were thorough.
This was the same hearing where someone that was real passionate about the Confederacy used the N-word. Is that the same hearing?
That's the hearing, yes.
Okay.
And I sent a letter to that individual's house. I've never done it in 12 years of being in the legislature. I sent a letter to that individual, which I have on my desk, denouncing that rhetoric and telling him
that person was thrown out of the hearing, though, was he? He was allowed to stay there?
The person was the last person, from my understanding, to testify, and I believe Senator Zaffarini had the gavel at the time and excused him right then.
Okay, and so, again, the reality is that's how explosive this particular legislation is, sir. Okay, and again, you have your right. I will defend your right to present your bill. Okay, but I think you do a disservice to Texas in terms of this particular bill, because the reality is some of the individuals that you would say are of historical significance today would be labeled terrorist in America. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
That would just be my opinion and yours, Senator West. I mean, as I mentioned before, as you mentioned the word traitor before, actions back then were different than how we would think if that were instigated today, and how our definitions and the way that we would talk today. For instance, back then, the common verbiage was just in general terms, the United States are a republic. Today, we would say 100 times out of 100, the United States is a republic. There's just different beliefs back then and what is and is not a breach of acceptable standards, and I can't speak to that, or I can't be responsible for that. All I can do is work together with you for a balanced process going forward.
Well, if you want to work together with Senator Miles and myself, this is not the way to go about doing it. This is what I would say to you. If you decide to pull this bill down, I don't mind working during the interim with you to go around the state of Texas in order to try to get a true sense of what people think needs to be done in order to address these issues. That's what I would do, and we would truly be working together if we did that, sir. What do you think about that?
I respect the suggestion, and I don't prefer to pull the bill down, but what I will commit to is this is statute. And every 2 years we consider and we reconsider statute. And what I will commit to is I will come to your district and I will sit with stakeholders that you deem appropriate in your district, and I will work with you through the interim, committed to continuing to improve the framework that we set forward, and I'll do that.
Well, it would seem as though that...
But I won't pull the bill down today.
It's obviously, you have a right to do that. But in terms of good faith, it would be a lot of good faith if you decided to do that. If you truly feel strongly about resolving this issue and you want bipartisan participation, and I agree that we need to come up with something, but I'd like to have input into the decision-making process and allow people that I represent. And see, again, Senator, you're not walking in my shoes or Senator Miles' shoes. We now have African Americans that are sitting on city councils that can raise issues. We now have Hispanics that can do the same thing. And guess what? There's going to be more and more Latinos and African Americans working with Anglos and Asians that will be serving on city councils and ultimately here in this legislative body. And so in terms of having input into the process and making a good faith effort to involve everyone, I think I would recommend, given what this is truly about, that you pull it down and let's work together on trying to get something done.
Senator West, I celebrate with you the diversity on our city councils and the representation and membership that's in place today. That very representation and that diversity is reflective of the diversity of the constituency they serve. And because of the diversity of the constituency they serve, the public referendum vote I have built into the bill will reflect in that public referendum vote the will and the voice of the diversity of the constituents that are in those cities. And so with that, the outcome will be owned by the people. And that is the framework that, as I've worked on this bill a couple of years, I had hoped to always foster that inclusive framework, and to make sure that, as the House author has worked several years on the bill, I don't think that I can consider pulling it down because there's been so much time in the process included, but I will work with you afterwards for any necessary changes following that are needed.
Well, I'm not going to prolong this discussion. Again, Senator, I wish you would pull it down, and I give you my word that I will work with you over the interim to try to perfect the bill. But, it's your bill, and you have the option to not pull the bill down, then I have the option to vote against it, which I plan on doing.
Thank you, Senator West. You're a class act.
Yes? Senator Rodriguez is next. Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you.